So I'm sharing the slide with you, and I hope now you are able to see the slide. So we will see what we have discussed, and there is a quick recap of what we have discussed in applied linguistics theory and practice. So we have raised some questions related to applied linguistics, and we have seen that applied linguistics is linguistics in action and interaction according to Kaplan. So what is linguistic in action? That means we are applying the theories and approaches that we have learned in linguistics. And what is interaction? That means like linguistics, when it interacts with other disciplines, then we have applied linguistics. So this very very precise definition by Kaplan, that applied linguistics is linguistics in action and interaction, is quite clear, and it also focuses on the scope of applied linguistics. Then we have seen that broadly we can divide linguistics into two: microlinguistics and macrolinguistics. And microlinguistics presents the narrower view, whereas macrolinguistics presents the broader view. We have also seen that under microlinguistics we have phonetics, phonology, morphology, and syntax, whereas in macrolinguistics we have applied linguistics and the related discipline, uh, where linguistics interacts with other disciplines. Then we have seen that what were the factors they were responsible for applied linguistics, and we saw that there was a shift towards user-oriented approaches, uh, such as reader response theory and literary criticism, learner-centered pedagogy in education. Then there were also few associations like British Association of Applied Linguistics, then International Association of Applied Linguistics, and American Association of Applied Linguistics. It also came into being. And we also saw that applied linguistics came into being because uh, there was a weakening of structuralism and the emergence of post-structuralism. Also, we have seen that the agenda of Seventh World Congress of Applied Linguistics decided uh, what would be the part of applied linguistics, what are the contents that can be studied under applied linguistics. We've also seen that we have limited views as well as broad views related to applied linguistics, where some linguists like Pitt Corders considers applied linguistics synonymous to English language teaching, and whereas we have Peter Stevens, who pointed out that under applied linguistics we can study many things, and it is a multidisciplinary approach to the solution of language-based problems. Then one such field, when linguistics interact with society, when linguistics interacts with sociology, then we have a field like sociolinguistics. And sociolinguistics is also very much the part of applied linguistics, where we can say, where we can see that how language takes a social turn. And we started with this commonsensical knowledge about communication or etiquette to communication, that how it is important to understand other person's perspective, because there is a philosophy lies in that. And that still philosophy is expressed in the words by Rumi, and what it says, that the heart has its own knowledge, the heart knows 100,000 ways to speak. Then we have seen that how this socio-cultural and ideological view of language is different from the structural view posited by B.F. Skinner. And we have also seen that how Noam Chomsky's cognitive approach to language is different from the behaviorist model of thought. Then in Noam Chomsky's approach to study language, we have seen that uh, this approach entails the pursuit of universals. That means there is only a surface level difference across languages, and largely languages are same. And this approach to study language by Noam Chomsky emphasizes generalization. Then he talks about certain absolute absolute universals and certain implicational universals. So what is absolute universal? One such example of absolute universal is that all languages have pronouns. So this is absolute universal that we have. So all languages have pronouns, all languages have nouns, all languages have verbs. So what are these things? They are absolute universals. But we have implicational universals. That means uh, languages, they have some particular features which make them different from each other. So if a language has, uh, let's say, a trial grammatical number, that means three numbers that we have. So what are the three numbers? Generally we have singular and plural in the English language. In Hindi language also we have singular and plural. But when it comes to Sanskrit language, we have dual also. So we have singular, dual, and plural. So this is trial grammatical number that we have. So what implication we are making? That if a language has trial grammatical number, it also has a dual grammatical number. So it is like very commonsensical that if a language has three numbers, then it also has dual grammatical number. So that type of thing is also emphasized by Noam Chomsky. And why it was emphasized? Because he was talking about the universals, he was not talking about the differences. So that is the thing. Then we discussed that Chomsky wrote a book like Syntactic Structure, and in this book, Chomsky revealed that language cannot be adequately explained as learned behavior. So learned behavior is something different, and this cognitive thing is something different. And he also said that there had to be some biological predisposition for children to learn language, because we see that children around us, they acquire a language in a very short duration, irrespective of the fact they get poor stimulus. Sometimes parents, out of love, they mispronounce certain words. So in place of saying chappal, they say pappal. So out of love, they mispronounce very many words, and they try to talk in a manner a child speaks. So they are not providing the correct data to child, but still after 3 or 4 years, what we can observe, what we can see, that child comes out as a competent speaker of a particular language. And one analogy of a person from Mars visiting uh, Earth, then what is that? That if a person comes from Mars and visit our planet Earth, then the person will find that the languages that are spoken across the globe, they are actually same. So this is the concept uh, posited by Noam Chomsky. And he also talks about that language is natural and language is innate. And he gave a term like language acquisition device, and he used this term that there is some device in the mind. Actually there is no device, but like a metaphor he used, that there is some device like language acquisition device that is responsible for acquiring a language very quickly without putting any conscious effort by a child. So this theory of Noam Chomsky is known as the generative grammar, and the ideas where when he said like when you talk about biological predisposition, when you talk about language acquisition device, natural, innate, all those things are the part of generative grammar. And what Chomsky said, that grammar is actually created in the brain and it grows in the mind. So basically, Chomsky uh, talk about descriptive linguistics, that linguists generally they must focus on how people speak language. They must describe how people speak rather than they prescribe rules. So generally when we go to a school, traditional grammar school, we have a grammar book, and in that grammar book we have lots of rules, lots of sentences. So that is a prescription. That is a prescription that you do this, you do not do this. If you do this, then you have a correct construction, and if you do that, then you have an incorrect construction. So that thing is there. So grammar in the context of linguistics is descriptive. That means like we need to observe the native speakers, and we need to observe the language they speak, and then we need to describe that. We will never prescribe that thing, because the grammar is generated, and linguists could map out the way language was used by speakers of a language to determine rules that could be used to describe the structure of the language. So what is said, how people speak, is to be described by a linguist, that why this is said in that particular manner. So it's not like it is a rule you need to follow, but a linguist provides a justification that why is it the case, why this thing happens. So for example, like when we study phonological rules, then we know that why it is impossible, and why it is irregular, and why it is illegal. So we have a word like possible, and if we want to make it opposite, we say impossible. So we have a word like legal, we want to make it opposite, we make it illegal. We have a word like condition, and we want to make it opposite, we say unconditional. So we know that we are making negative, but we are using different prefix. At possible we are before possible we are using im, before legal we are using ill, before conditional we are using u and un. So why we are doing that? And linguists, they provide the justification for that. So language is innate according to Chomsky, and the specific language spoken by humans were generated based on what was spoken in one's childhood environment. So like once a pattern is developed in the mind, then you can make innumerable number of sentences in your entire life. So there is one more linguist, that is Stephen Pinker. And what is Stephen Pinker's views on Chomsky? Stephen Pinker says that every child recreates or generates the language according to those rules that were acquired. So these rules are not learned. So there is a difference between learned something and acquired something. You need to learn something by putting conscious effort. For example, you know how to read now, and you know, like when you read something, you need to put conscious effort, then you can read something. If you want to write something, then you need to put conscious effort, then you write something. But when it comes to speaking, then you need not to put conscious effort. You can say anything fluently, you can construct anything fluently. So that is like reading and writing, they are learned behavior. You learned these things once you admitted in a formal institution, in some school, and then you learned how to read and how to write, or how to do mathematics. But speaking language, particularly your mother tongue, is not a learned behavior, but it is acquired. So whatever you have acquired, the rules that you have acquired, you can apply to innumerable number of sentences. That is the view by Stephen Pinker. So no one has to teach the child how to speak in a correct sentence. So it's not the case. Child learns automatically. Uh, she just seemed to know. It was as natural as the child learning to walk. So it's not the case like the child is taking coaching classes that how to walk in a manner. So gradually child walks, and similarly a child learns a language. The supporters of generative grammar conclude that because children learn language so fast, they must be programmed to speak language. So there is an assumption. This is a hypothesis that how does a child learn a language so fast, or how do children learn language so fast? So there must be a program in their brain that if you are in the environment where any language is spoken, you will pick up that language. So a child is born in France will pick up French. Child is born in, let's say, in India. Then any language spoken in India, the child will pick up. A child is born in US, and the child will pick up the US English. And if in the environment four languages are spoken, and if child is placed in such environment, then child will pick up all those four languages at the very same time with the equal fluency and competency. So this is the view generative grammar provides. Since grammar has been built in the brain, all humans are able to generate an infinite set of new sentences. That means you can generate any sentence, and all the time when you say something, you never feel that, okay, I am uttering an old sentence, or like I am uttering, let's say, a sentence that has been uttered by so many people, so I am get bored with that particular sentence that I am uttering. So you or the speakers of a language never feel that type of feeling. So all humans are able to generate an infinite set of new sentences, and there is no limit to the number of sentences that can be spoken, because every sentence is new and every sentence follows the rules generated in the mind. So people have different voices, people have different ways of saying things. Even if you are saying the same sentence, you will say it a bit differently because you have different voice quality. So that's why everything is new for you. That is one thing. But at the same time, you can also utter all the time new sentence. That is the beauty of the language. So that is one thing, like B.F. Skinner. When we talk about B.F. Skinner, then language was perceived as a behavior, a learned behavior. When we look at Noam Chomsky, then there is a cognitive approach to language that we have. Now, what is next? So now we will move from this cognitive approach to a social turn. So starting from behavior to cognitive, and now it is a social turn. So in the 1960s and 70s, scholars began to view language as a culturally embedded practice. So it's not the case that language is a code only. It is also not the case language is to be studied on its own in isolation. Rather, language is to be studied in the culture. So this is the cultural turn. So Delheims, an important sociolinguist, focused on the social aspect of language and is often credited as one of the major leaders of the social turn in linguistics. So like Delheims, one important figure, a sociolinguist, and he is responsible for the social turn in linguistics. Then other sociolinguists, they are Labov, Wolfram, Smitherman, were interested not so much how languages worked as a system. So let's say Chomsky, Pinker, and other generative grammarians, they are more focused on uh, how language works as a system. But these sociolinguists, they are not satisfied with this view, but they see rather how it was used as a cultural tool, a social marker, like how my language is different from your language, how a language of a 40-year-old person is different from a language of 15 years old, how a language of an old person is different from a young, how a language of a female is different from a male. So these are social markers, how a language is spoken by, let's say, an illiterate is different from a literate person, how a language that is spoken by a middle class is different from a lower class. So what is this? That language is also a social marker, a cultural tool, indicating the inequities. Inequities means like the inequalities that we have of any kind. So people, they have studied like African American, how African American they are different from let's say the white Americans, how their language is different, or the Caucasian, the Caucasian they use the language is different from the other US speakers. So these type of studied came into being with the social turn. So another prominent area of research that arose from this social turn is active pursuit of language preservation and revitalization. So there are many languages which are to be preserved, which are to be revitalized. For example, like I also work on language and I have documented a couple of languages. Let's say there is a language spoken in the Doda district known as Saraji that I have documented. There is a language that is spoken in the Bhadarwa region, that is Bhadarwai, that I have documented. So this is like, this is again a social turn that you you put active interest in language preservation and revitalization. And why it is important? Because with the extinction of a language, that means when there is a language death. So when there is a language death, when no speaker is speaking that particular language, then that type of phenomenon is known as language death or language extinction. So with the extinction of a language comes the loss of very specific knowledge. Now, there is a possibility that you might question that what we will lose if people stop speaking Dogri language. What we will lose if people stop speaking Kashmiri language. So that type of thing, that certain ways of thinking or ways of knowing are lost when a language dies. So for example, each culture is specific. People living in that particular culture is specific. So that knowledge is not a knowledge of 10 years, 15 years, but that knowledge is of centuries. So that knowledge of dealing with disease, that knowledge let's say worldly wisdom, that knowledge of stories, that knowledge of let's say cultural songs, folk songs, folk tales, everything will be lost when there is a loss of language. So with this social turn, we also study language contact, that how one language uh, influences other language. So that is also the part. We also study different dialects, whether two languages, two varieties are a dialect or a different language. That is also the thing. So revitalization programs sought to resurrect dead languages. So there is a possibility that no one speaks a particular language known as X. Then how we can work on that particular language? So there is a possibility that you find that particular language text in some library, and you can just try to resurrect that language, that okay, what will be the grammar of that particular language, and you try to preserve the dying ones. So there is one linguist, field linguist like Bernard Spolsky, studied how bilingual education was being used to maintain the Navajo language. So there is a language, a Navajo language that we have. Over the time, Navajo language was falling out of common use, especially among young Navajo people. So there is a possibility, like not many people they are interested in speaking Bhadarwai language. Not many people are interested in speaking Saraji language. So they will switch from Saraji to Hindi, Saraji to Dogri, Saraji to English, and later on they will also teach their kids that okay, there is no fun in learning Saraji or Bhadarwai language because you will not get a job once you study Saraji and Bhadarwai language. So that type of studies are also there, that how to stop that type of thinking or how to promote that particular type of language, and how to stop that language shift from one language to minor language to major language, or a language of prestige. So all such things are also associated. So I stop here, and if you have any doubt or question, then you can raise your doubt and question. I'll be happy to answer it. And I hope that now you are getting what we are discussing. So we studied the scope of applied linguistics, and we had a quick recap when we started this session. At the same time, we have seen that language was perceived as a behavior, a learned behavior, like a habit. Then there was a shift in 1957 by the cognitive approach of Noam Chomsky. And then there is also a social turn when with the work of Delheims and Labov and others. So now we are studying the social linguistics part. We are studying how linguistics interact with in sociology or society, and then we have entire new type of concepts and things that are to be studied and that are also the part of applied linguists. So anyone has any doubt